Hey, thank you all for joining me for another Friday afternoon. This is fast, isn't it? The weeks are flying. I'm excited for this topic because I feel like it's a topic that is just not well known. Um, I don't know how many people are, other than the companies that are involved, I don't know how many people are aware of DARPA's involvement in lunar exploration and in development. This is an older award, 2 months old or so, but it felt like a blip in the December holidays and all of that. And so I really wanted to emphasize it because I think most people just are not aware that there's more going out there, more going on in the space sector that is government funded, that is US government funded, than what NASA is. And it all ties together. In my opinion, this is a supplement of the main show of the Artemis program. So I want to talk about it, and I want to remind you that this is a Q&A show. So go ahead and type your questions or comments in the chat, or if you're watching and not live, you can go ahead and put them in the comments, and I will try my best to answer them. Hello, Ross. Great. Thank you for joining again. Okay, so it is the year 2035, and a thriving lunar economy exists on the moon. How did we get there? So I didn't write that. That was a quote from the DARPA press release, the announcement. I thought it was catchy. My initial thought is, we don't have a thriving lunar economy in 2035. That's very optimistic. That's very sci-fi because I think that's very, very optimistic that in 11 years we'd have a thriving lunar economy. I think we'll have the beginnings of one. I think we'll have some things happening. We'll definitely have the Artemis program in full swing, with humans landing on the moon. What that will look like as an economy, like that's the word, right? Like, I don't think it's there yet. I think that's really super optimistic that by 2030, mid 2030, that'll happen. But I did really like that DARPA framed it that way because it got you thinking, where do we want to be in a decade? Where do we want to actually go? And we have to be intentional. I tell this of all my clients. You have to know where you want to go and be intentional about getting there. And so for those of you who don't know what DARPA is, let me take a step back. DARPA has a very long history. Previously, under a different iteration, it was ARPA. It is a government research and development branch, you can call it. Do I even have the acronym? I thought I had the acronym. You really can't hear me? Dave, can you hear me? Somebody else help Dave. Can you hear me, or is it me? Meanwhile, I'm going to look up DARPA. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So it is a branch of the U.S. government. Can anyone else hear me? I know there's other people other than Dave and Ross online right now. So can you hear me? Ross, thank you. Branch that is not well discussed because it's sort of in the back, are not Lunar Architecture Capability Study, or Luna 10 for short. I'm just going to read what it says in the press release, the announcement release. DARPA supports a future model where NASA, international governments, and commercial industry can rapidly scale up lunar exploration and commerce, enabled and supported by the deployment of an efficiently combined integrated lunar infrastructure framework. So what that means is DARPA is looking ahead and thinking, yeah, it's great for us to go land humans on the moon and plant a flag. We did that with Apollo, right? That's great. But what's the infrastructure that needs to support that? What's the infrastructure that needs to support the roving, the landing, the staying? What are all these little things that we take for granted here on Earth that actually do need to be developed and actually should be funded and developed way in advance, so that we know that when we are ready to really kick off Artemis on the surface of the moon, that we are ready to go. So that's what excites me about this, is because it's so low key. It's not big flashy starship landing on the moon with people on board. It is in the background, but so crucial. So they actually outlined 12 areas in which they want to focus: construction, mining, transit or mobility, and engineering. Oh my gosh. Friday afternoons, I cannot talk. I don't know why I do these live streams Friday afternoons. Energy, agriculture, medicine, robotics, life sustainment, experiments, including lunar and planetary science experiments, communication, digital infrastructure, and position navigation and timing, PNT. Also known here in the US, GPS is what we have as our PNT. So that's a long list, right? But you can already see like it's the basics. It's how do you live and work on another planetary body? Sort of like how the ISS had to really set up those basics on a small scale because the ISS is like a 2-story house, right? Now we're talking the surface of the moon, or at least the surface of the moon where we're going to have human activity or even automated activity because it doesn't need to be human run activity. So the first announcement was made back in August, I want to say, of last year. And then the awards were made in December for the topic area 1, which focuses again from their press release, focuses on a portfolio of lunar providers and users who will together define a series of future integrated lunar frameworks. And so this is a 7-month study that they're starting out with, again, awarded 2 months ago. It's up to $1 million each. So they did not actually announce what the awards were, but up to $1 million. And there were 14 awardees, or in their framing, participants. I think this is what they called them. And what I find really interesting is that it's just the beginning, right? So DARPA has money. The Department of Defense has a lot of money. People don't realize that the Department of Defense has more money to spend on space than NASA. Just the Space Force budget is larger than NASA's budget. So we're talking good money here that could be used to kind of support what NASA is attempting to do with its Artemis program, which is returning humans back to the moon to stay sustainably. And so when we're thinking about what support does NASA need and why does NASA need the support? Well, DARPA has money. Department of Defense in general has money. There are other agencies, other groups within the Department of Defense. And there's stuff that needs to happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about why the Department of Defense would put their budget towards something like this. It's not like it's supporting the wars on Earth or the war fighters on Earth or, reconnaissance on Earth. Like it's out there, right? So why is the Department of Defense putting money towards something like this? But before I do that, I do want to talk about the Outer Space Treaty. This is a really good time to talk about the fact that the Outer Space Treaty specifies what the moon and celestial bodies should be used for. For those of you who don't know, back in 1967, quite a number of countries, including the United States, signed the Outer Space Treaty at the UN, which is a governing body of like how we should behave, what we agree to. And in Article 4, which the DARPA announcement specifically called out, Article 4 says, in part, the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used by all state parties to the treaty exclusively for exclusively for peaceful purposes. The establishment of military bases, installations, and fortifications, the testing of any type of weapons, and conduct of military maneuvers on celestial bodies shall be forbidden. The use of military personnel for scientific research or for any other peaceful purposes shall not be prohibited. So what DARPA is saying here is they plan to abide by the Outer Space Treaty as we have agreed to under the signatory, United States is signatory. So we've agreed to participate in this fully. And so what DARPA is saying is that this effort, Luna 10, is not to break the Outer Space Treaty Article 4, which says that the moon should not be militarized. There should be no military bases, installations, fortifications. But the Article 4 also says that military personnel for scientific research or any other peaceful purposes is allowed, right? Shall not be prohibited. So that's what DARPA is saying. It falls under that category. So now that we've covered that, what's the purpose of this? It is for commercialization, because DARPA actually calls out, quote, the envisioned lunar architecture is not intended to support human exploration or scientific experimentation that does not have commercial value. So in other ways of saying that is, this is not going to go for anything that's not for commercial purposes. It also says in the announcement, DARPA's Luna 10 T1 is the first one, the first award. What did I just call it? Topic area. TA1 is topic area. Luna 10 TA1 effort. So sorry, I'm going to start that over. Luna 10 TA1 effort is focused on creating off-Earth economic vibrancy through monetizable commercial services provided to a wide variety of users intended to operate on and around the moon. So if you remember back to the first thing I read, it talked about NASA, but it also talked about international governments. It talked about commercial industry. So DARPA is really saying it's going to put this money towards truly commercializing the moon at cislunar space, XGO, however you want to phrase it. Luna 10 can be made to not overlap each other and duplicate Capability. Okay, so we're going to talk about that because we're going to go into the specifics of what was awarded to who. And there is overlap, absolutely. And I think it's a good thing that there's overlap because there's never enough money to go around. If you talk to any one of these companies, you might get one that says that, oh, they've got plenty of money for this effort. But most of the time they're saying, actually, we could use this money to bring in more people, to speed up this effort, to have this new equipment, to do this testing. So you really actually do want multiple funding sources, government and private. And even commercial, so that you can support these efforts so that they can happen and that they can happen quickly. Now, I will say that there were 14 awardees for this TA1, and those 14 awardees probably will not all succeed, right? It's seed funding in a way. It's a way of saying, what technologies do we want to see? And which ones are going to go forward and which ones are a really good idea to go forward and we'll get additional funding in the future and we'll go on through the TRL, technology readiness level, stepping stones, and which ones, they'll go and get money into it initially, but it won't actually happen, or it'll happen in a different way, or a different company will provide that. So I think that this is all a means of developing technology that may or may not be on the moon, but it really is truly the basics. So I do want to get into this. The awardees were Blue Origin, Lunar Industries, Crescent Space Services, which is a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, Fibertech, Firefly Aerospace, ghee-tai, which is a Japanese company, and I cannot figure out if it's actually pronounced ghee-tai or if it's pronounced ghee-tai or something like that. Someone tell me. Helios, Honeybee Robotics, Icon, Nokia, Northrop Grumman, Redwire Corporation, Sierra Space, and SpaceX. So those are the 14 winners. Not all of them put out a press release, but the ones that did, they mentioned what they're going to put this money towards, what their development is. And so I'm going to go through each one of them one by one fairly quickly because time is actually running short here. I've been going through this a bit too slow, apparently. All right, so I did want to give a quote here by the program manager, Michael Nyack, who has the wonderful name, the code name of Orbit. I think that's just really cool. So shout out to you, Michael. He said in the announcement of the awardees, he said, Luna 10 performers include companies both big and small, domestic and international, each of which brought a clear vision and technological rigorous plan for advancing quickly towards our goal, a self-sustaining, monetizable, commercially owned and operated lunar infrastructure. So here again, it's really emphasizing the commercial aspect, but it's also emphasizing the collaborations, the potential ways that these companies can work together. Because when you're thinking about, let's just take, for example, a power source, a power generation, right? So if you've got a company that's creating some kind of way of generating power on the moon, well, you still need to have some other way of working with some other companies, some, shared understanding of hardware or standards, so that you can not just collect that energy, but also feed that energy to the electronics, put it in the grid, right? It all needs to work together. And here on Earth, we often have government agencies, smaller level counties or cities doing that for us. But on the moon, there's nothing, right? So it's important to have not just all this infrastructure, but have it working together as a collective so that we can, not just be individual pieces all over the moon, but an integrated system that's working together commercially. Okay, so the ones that put out press releases, Blue Origin did not, but their partner PowerLight did. And so they said Blue Origin and PowerLight are focusing on a system that could generate power for lunar operations, perhaps using solar sails manufactured on the moon, and then transmit that power to remote locations via laser light. So getting back to your question, Ross, Blue Origin did actually already develop a ISRU, an in-situ resource utilization power converter, I think it was. Was it something about Archimedes, not Archimedes now? Somebody tell me in the comments, because I didn't look this up ahead of time. It was your comment, Ross, that reminded me of they actually developed this little thing for this purpose or for something similar that was, I think, in part funded by NASA. So when we're talking about the different ways that this money could contribute or overlap to what NASA has already provided or what these companies are doing internally, this is a really great example. Lunar Industries is partnering with industry experts to bring knowledge in terrestrial mining and extraction, equipment autonomy, sustainability, and digital transformation to complement the company's expertise. So thank you, Hannibal. It might be wrong, but ghee-tai may be ghee-tai. as if I recall, starting company with specialization in robotics and AI. You're absolutely right. It is a robotics and AI company. So all of their videos, by the way, all of their videos on their YouTube, they don't have any voiceovers or interviews. So it's all just like, just visual. So I could not figure out how to pronounce their company, but you might be right. It might be ghee-tai, as in AI, like calling that out there. It's a really good point. And then speaking of, I'm going to jump to them really fast. ghee-tai's winning, or GITAI, ghee-tai, I don't know, winning proposal revolves around a concept for deployment of modular, multi-purpose inchworm robotics equipped with tool changeable and effectors to conduct lunar surface labor. The robots are designed to handle various tasks from construction to maintenance to adaptation without unnecessary duplication, which I find really cool because one of my clients actually works on a robotic system for Mars. So I think that's awesome. I was going in alphabetical order, so I'm going to jump back up to Firefly. Firefly's contribution will include a framework for an aggregated hub of on-orbit spacecraft that dock together and offer on-demand services to both visiting spacecraft and dispersed spacecraft across cislunar space. The core services offered to visiting spacecraft would include propellant transfers, payload transfers, and sharing of power, computation, and thermal resources. Firefly's Electra vehicles based at these hubs would also offer responsive mission services for payload delivery, orbital transfers, repositioning, and deorbiting. So I want to pause here and point out that not only do we need to integrate all of these different players together to make it a usable system on the moon, they're also talking about customers, right? Firefly is not putting themselves out there talking about all these different payload transfer and fuel transfer for nothing. They're talking about the fact that they want customers. They want people to realize they have this capability so that they can get customers to do all of that, whether in cislunar space or in orbit around Earth or wherever. Blue Alchemist. Thank you, Ross. So Blue Origin's ISU program is called Blue Alchemist. Thank you. Honeybee Robotics is selected to develop and integrate its technology lightsaber, lunar utility navigation with advanced remote sensing and autonomous beaming for energy distribution. And this one might be my favorite because of the image. Go ahead and look and Google this one. So this is Honeybee Robotics Lunar Saber. It is literally a street lamp. They have a pole with lunar, landing legs on the lunar surface with light shining down. Like it is like a street lamp. And when you think about what's needed to operate on the moon at night, right? Like, so the night has a lot of challenges. The night on the moon is a lot longer than the night on Earth. It has a lot more challenges in that you're going to be in the dark and the cold. And the fact that you need to even think about the fact that you need a light, you need that light source. You can't just rely on the fact that you're going to bring like spotlights or something. This is your permanent spotlight. So everybody operating on the moon doesn't need to worry about bringing their own spotlight. You will just have Honeybee Robotics providing that for you. I mean, I just love the simplicity of all of this. It's very difficult. It's very complex. It's not simple, but the concepts are simple, right? Icon, by the way, it didn't say exactly what it was doing, but it's pretty self-explanatory with this beginning sentence. Icon, a leader in advanced construction technologies and large-scale 3D printing. So that's an incomplete sentence. Sorry about that. But basically, they are a 3D printing company, and they are going to 3D print buildings on the moon. And they already have Project Olympus, I think is what they call that, for NASA. So they're already working on this concept with NASA. They've got a really pretty picture as well. Nokia Bell Labs will be responsible for recommending a reliable, high-performance communication infrastructure, and will also work closely with other Luna 10 companies to ensure that infrastructure may be efficiently transported and built on the lunar surface, and that they would have reliable power sources once installed. So again, we're talking about collaboration, right? They're not just providing that communications infrastructure. They actually need to send that communications out, connect with all the other players involved. Yeah, Hannibal says it's so fascinating to think about the most things that we normally ignore. Exactly, right? Like, if you're starting from scratch, which we are, it's worse than just building in the desert, because at least the desert has air, which the moon does not, or an atmosphere, or there's so much to think about. And I love that we're thinking about it now. We should have been thinking about it decades ago, but we have the technology and the commercialization efforts to do it now, I think, hopefully. Redwire's contribution for the Luna 10 study will be focused on approaches for providing critical services to lunar assets from cislunar space, including high-speed communications and position, navigation, and timing PNT. A constellation of cislunar orbiting platforms offering robust services and broad lunar coverage will be a critical part of thriving commercial lunar ecosystem. And Sierra Space will focus on integrating oxygen extraction, electrical storage, and hydrogen oxygen engine technology into its architecture for a commercial lunar infrastructure concept. And I just want to pause here and say that as someone who comes from a lunar science background where I am pretty passionate about the need for ISRU, in situ resource utilization, I love that Sierra Space is doing ISRU through DARPA, because NASA just does not have that funding to commit that much money to. NASA's committed to the Gateway and to Artemis 1, 2, and 3. Well, one's passed, but Artemis 2 and 3, and it's committed so much to these big efforts. But things like ISRU, which we're going to need, that's how do we use the material on the moon to build everything that we're going to need? It's been mostly ignored. I mean, it's been going on, but it's just low funding levels. So here is Sierra Space and a few of the others, you can argue, who are doing that through DARPA money. So I did say that I wanted to talk about why DARPA would be spending this money when this is obviously very much a peaceful purposes, usually NASA type of operation. Aside from the fact that DARPA has the money and NASA doesn't necessarily have the money for all these extras. So when we're talking about going to the moon the first time and the second time, so Apollo and Artemis, it was so much for geopolitical purposes. The whole space race with the US and the Soviet Union was the key driver for why Apollo happened and why Apollo stopped. Yes, you could argue it was a money thing, but the money was provided because of the geopolitical motivation. So when you're talking about Artemis, or exploring the moon in general, or even exploring and developing cislunar space. I didn't define that. Cislunar is the area around the moon, generally defined as between the moon and the Earth. But it is that general area that is not the surface of the moon. When we're talking about defining that, we are talking about U.S. leadership and U.S. dominance. So I come from a civil science background where, I'm a planetary science and astrophysics background where I did not think in these terms, but I've come to understand that when we're talking about geopolitics, we're talking about U.S. dominance, U.S. Maintaining global leadership. And right now, that competition is not with the Soviet Union. Russia, it has been in a decline for quite some time, and most recently since the start of the Ukraine war. Now we're talking about China, right? And we're talking about the fact that China actually has committed funding and other resources to land people on the surface of the moon. I think by 2030 is their timeline. I did a thing on this a couple of months actually back, about the difference between the Chinese base camp and the US base camp and what that all looks like. And so when we're talking about how does the United States stay on the moon, and what does it even look like if we are in a competition, which, arguably we are. I'm not going to use the term space race, but we are in a competition, right? A geopolitical competition where we, United States, have international partners and allies, and so does China. China has its program, and it has international allies and partners. And the two are going to, in some way, interact. The moon is a fairly large landmass, but it is not the same as Earth, where it has a much lower gravity. And so I previously worked back in my grad school days with a fantastic scientist named Phil Metzger. He's at UCF right now, which is where I was doing my doctoral work. And he has put out studies where, if you are landing with retro rockets on the surface of the moon, that's going to kick up dust. And even just operating like a mining operation is going to kick up dust. And because the gravity is so low on the moon, that dust is going to go all over the planet. That dust is going to go up into orbit and interfere with things that are in the lunar orbit. So you have to be aware of what everybody is doing on the surface of the moon, simply because of those physical realities. And so when you're thinking about the fact that the United States and its partners and China and its partners are both going to be trying to operate things on the surface of the moon, well, then you have to think about the fact that there's also going to be conflict or diplomatic reasoning, to communicate. Right now, there's all kinds of complexities, and I'm simplifying because of the time. But when we talk about the fact that this is a peaceful purposes operation, we also need to consider the fact that it could not be. it may turn, and I'm not talking about like For All Mankind kind of situation, if you guys know that TV show, but there could definitely be conflict on the moon. And I don't want to see that happen. And I think the majority of people watching this do not want to see a conflict on the moon, based on the fact that we're all just trying to do the best we can in a remote location, in a harsh location. And so when you're thinking about just the very fact that we're going to be operating with adversarial players also on the surface of the moon, DoD wants to give us as much as DoD wants to give the United States as much of an advantage as it can. That means the infrastructure. That means the ability to continuously survey and have that rapid communication and rapid response, and all the other things that we have here on Earth that we take for granted with eyes in the sky and all of this. The DoD wants to replicate that, because for one thing, it could actually prevent conflict. If you have more information, and that information says that everything's innocent and it was an accident, or something didn't happen, it was caused by something else, the more information you have, the more you can say this was not an act of aggression. This was just the physics, something like that. Or if there is an act of aggression, we want to know that too. And we want to know that ASP, and we want to know that on all the different levels. And so that is why I believe, just a really messy way of saying, I apologize for that, I'm rambling, but it really, basically, the DoD wants to protect U.S. assets and U.S. ally assets on the surface of the moon and in cislunar space. That's the bottom line. And that is why the DoD is funding this. That's why DARPA is just starting out with this 7-month study, and will continue to do studies over the course of the next many years, no doubt. Because I don't see Artemis being canceled. I see this as that continuing on. How long Artemis goes on as a U.S. government project, I don't know, but it's our future. And so we just want to make sure that we're doing it right, and we're doing it for the peaceful purposes that the Outer Space Treaty calls upon us. And that does mean making sure that we can stay there sustainably and act responsibly. Due regard is another big thing in the Outer Space Treaty that I do not have time to get into, because we're near the end of this. Hannibal says, even the current moon missions have geopolitical motivation. Yeah, that's right. Be prepared in a blind situation. Yes. And Ross, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, this is a Q&A. So if you have any topics or questions that you want me to cover, please go ahead and put them in the chat here, the comments, or send them to me on a different platform. If this is of interest to you, you can go to astrolytical.com/subscribe. I'm the executive director of Astrolytical. We put out a newsletter every Monday morning with this information on a more detailed, laid out fashion. So if you want to know more in detail, you can subscribe to that newsletter, and you can go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you would like as well. I would appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Happy Friday. Thank you, David, for tuning in.